Today, real disposable income has stalled since 2009. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to our latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. One of the themes which has come through in our rolling household surveys is that while costs of living are rising fast, incomes are not. And in the context of bigger mortgages, even at lower interest rates, this is a big deal. People feel they are, to quote, going backwards. So no wonder spending is down. Now, of course, the official statistics says that inflation is just 1.3% while the rate of wage growth is 2.3%. But today's release of the 17th wave of Australia's Household Income and Labour Dynamic Survey, HILDA for short, reveals that despite what the official statistics may say, and we have discussed before why they're inaccurate, people were right to feel they were going backwards. The Australian Bureau of Statistics doesn't examine what happens to a particular household over time, so it can tell us very little about whether an individual's experience of things is getting better or getting worse. In many ways, it's worse than useless, as it's fundamentally misleading. Now, HILDA is funded by the Australian government and managed by the Melbourne Institute of Applied Economic and Social Research, and is a valuable tool for Australian social research. It examined the lives of 14,000 Australians in 2001 and then kept coming back to them each year to discover what had changed. By surveying their children as well, and in future surveying their children, it will be able to build up a long-term picture of how circumstances change over the course of lives and generations. But it's only up to 2017, so the findings are old before they're published. And we know from the DFA surveys things have continued to deteriorate further. Incidentally, the RBA often cites HILDA, but fails to highlight how old the data actually is. And as the population grows, the 14,000 becomes potentially less statistically representative, down to 0.15% in 2017. Our survey, in contrast, is a more healthy 0.5% of the population, and of course is current to the end of June 2019. But that said, HILDA's results have statistical significance, and the questions are detailed, asking, among other things, about depression and anxiety, work-life stress, stress in relationships, and even illicit drug use. And so in the conversation today, the findings were discussed, and I've added some additional charts as we discuss what they said. I've also included a link to HILDA in the comments below. HILDA gets a handle on each household's disposable income by asking each member of the household about their gross income from wages, benefits, investments, and other sources, and then deducting its estimate of taxes. It gets a handle on the real inflation-adjusted changes by adjusting its totals for changes in the Consumer Price Index. It finds that for the thousands of households it interviewed, real disposable income grew strongly during the first 9 years of the survey between 2001 and 2009, and then after the global financial crisis for the 8 years between 2009 and 2017, that growth has stalled. Expressed in today's dollars, the average annual real disposable income of those households climbed by $19,773 between 2001 and 2009. That's about $2,472 per year. But most of the growth was during the mining boom that stretched from 2003 to 2009, when the average annual real disposable household income climbed about $3,000 a year, as did the income of the more representative median or middle household. Since 2009 and the global financial crisis, the average and the median have moved in different directions. The average household's annual real disposable income has climbed a further $3,156. The median or typical household's income has fallen $542, although not steadily. It fell between 2009 and 2011, climbing in 2012, and changed little thereafter. So one of the really interesting pieces of information contained in the Hilda survey relates to the change in median household equivalized income across the regions. And we're going to look at that data in more detail now. So in Sydney, comparing the median income in 2012 and 13 to 2016 and 17, the change was 1.6%. In Melbourne, it rose 4.1%. In Brisbane, it was 1.1%. In Adelaide, it had dropped 1%. In Perth, it had fallen 5.2%. That's one of the reasons why we see considerable issues over in the West. In the rest of New South Wales, incomes had dropped by 2%. In the rest of Victoria, they'd risen 2.9%. In the rest of Queensland, they'd risen 0.5%. In the rest of South Australia, they'd risen 1.2%. In the rest of Western Australia, they'd fallen a massive 7%. In Tasmania, they'd risen 0.4%. In the Northern Territories, they've risen 8.8%. In the Australian Capital Territories, and this was a surprise, they'd fallen by 11%. And across Australia, the rise was 0.6%. Hilda results also show that it has become harder to get ahead, in the phrase often used by the Prime Minister. Between 2001 and 2005, 40% of the households in the bottom fifth of earners, that's the bottom quintile, moved out of it into a higher one. In more recent years, between 2012 and 2016, a lower 38.5% moved up. And between 2001 and 2005, 44% of households in the top quintile had to move down to let other households take their place. In more recent years, between 2012 and 2016, only 41.5% have moved down. And getting a long way out of the income circumstances you were born in is, frankly, a long shot, according to Hilda's early attempt at measuring intergenerational mobility. People who were aged 32 to 34 years in 2015-17 are highly likely to be in the same household income quintile as those people found themselves in when they were 15 or 17 years old back in 2001 to 3. There's only a 1 in 10 chance of moving from the bottom quintile as a teenager to the top quintile in your early 30s. That's a 37% chance you'll stay put. Even among teenagers who grew up in the middle quintile, there's only a 17% chance of making it to the top, along with only a 19% chance of moving one rung up. Interestingly, women turn out to be more tied to the income their families had when they were children than men, and both men and women tend to stay more closely tied to their mother's income than their father's. When Hilda began in 2001, 39% of Australians aged 18 to 64 were living in a household that received government welfare of some kind. By 2017, that proportion had fallen to 31%, but almost all of the drop happened before the global financial crisis in 2009. Most of us are still in households that have received something from the government over a 10-year period. 58% of working-age Australians in 2017, down from 64% in 2010. And among older Australians aged 65 and over, reliance on the age pension and other benefits for more than half of income needs has dropped from 60% to 51%. Among new retirees aged 65 and over, the proportion receiving the age pension has fallen from 76% of men and 74% of women to just 60% of men and 55% of women. But while the growth of compulsory superannuation is likely to be part of the story, almost all of the decline happened before the financial crisis in 2009, suggesting that the destruction of wealth in the crisis kept people on the pension who otherwise might not have needed it. Before the financial crisis, almost 3/4 or 73% of men of traditional working age were employed full-time. After the crisis, the rate slipped to a much lower 76% and has stayed there. Female full-time employment was also hit by the crisis, but has since almost totally recovered to be just a fraction below its pre-crisis peak of 39.6%. And women's hourly earnings are also climbing faster than men's, up to 24% between 2001 and 2017, compared to 21% for men's. While women have always been more likely than men to be employed casually, since the crisis, male casual employment has climbed, while female casual employment has in fact declined. The two are now as close as they've ever been, with women now only 6 percentage points more likely than men to be employed casually. In dual earner male-female couples, the proportion in which the woman earns more than the man has climbed from 22% to 25%. The woman, being the main breadwinner, is more common in couples that aren't legally married and don't have children. It is also far more common in the regions than in the cities, and among couples in which the man doesn't have a university degree. Men in predominantly female breadwinner households are somewhat less happy with their lives and with their relationships, as, perhaps surprisingly, are women. Fathers tend to agonize more about work-family conflict than mothers, notwithstanding the much greater amount of housework and childcare work performed by mothers, and men who worry the most work long hours, have irregular shifts, and very young children. A mother working the same hours as a father will typically be more conflicted. Most parents suffering high work-family conflict get out of it within a year or two, often by managing things better and sometimes by changing jobs. And those suffering high work-family conflicts are 50% more likely than others to separate the next year. So all up, this is actually a very worrying snapshot of real households and their experiences. But the key takeout is that, unlike the official statistics, many households are indeed going backwards. And in the context of overall financial household balance sheets and the worrying trends in terms of flat or falling income growth and continued rising costs, remember, Hilda's only to 2017, we think that these trends are continuing. And that is one simple reason why mortgage stress continues to rise. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.